Jana, thanks. Westfield State University has been hit with a federal civil rights complaint for alleged racial discrimination. But they're not the only university in New England, or even in our area for that matter, facing these allegations. Western Mass News reporter Reagan Locree joining us live in studio tonight to explain. Reagan?
That's right, Chris. A complaint filed this week by a civil rights group claims Westfield State University violated federal law by using race, ethnicity, or national origin as criteria for eligibility in professional development programs. EqualProtect.org has called for a federal investigation into alleged Title VI violations made by several universities across New England. I spoke with the group's founder, William Jacobson. He tells Western Mass News that Westfield State is one of 20 universities listed as members of the North Star Collective. All 20 are in the complaint for allegedly hosting discriminatory programs. But we want to know, in the group's eyes, what makes the program discriminatory.
It is a program which is the BIPOC fellowship, so it is only open to people who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. So it includes everybody except for white people, and that's discrimination. The civil rights laws protect everybody, not just certain groups.
Western Mass News obtained documents from the complaint filed by Equal Protect. And out of the 20 colleges listed, 10 of them are in Massachusetts and 2 of them are located here in Western Mass. Besides Westfield State, the other university mentioned was UMass Amherst.
And because they receive federal funding, they're subject to the civil rights laws. They also, to the extent they are public universities, are subject to the U.S. constitutional guarantee of equal protection of the laws. When you have racial classifications and color classifications and ethnic classifications, that very clearly violates the civil rights laws.
Jacobson tells us his organization is not in search of any monetary compensation. They just want to end what they're calling discrimination.
In every one of the cases we've brought, the schools have their own non-discrimination policies. So we are not asking Westfield or any of the other 19 schools to do anything other than live up to their own non-discrimination policies. They have these policies on the books. They should be enforced and they should be honored.
Westfield State University tells me they have no comment at this time. I also reached out to UMass Amherst, but we have not yet heard back. Reporting live in studio, Reagan Locree for Western Mass News.
Reagan, thank you for that live report. And still ahead, the annual Holyoke St. Patrick's